And then I began to form an idea. Suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to do.
Can a supplement or a medication really boost your brain power, increase your focus and your creativity, make you more charming? That's what anyone who's interested in nootropics wants to know, and that's what I'm going to address in this video, as well as which nootropics work best, how to use them, etc. This will serve as your guide and introduction to the world of nootropics. So the first thing you should know is that technically nootropics is pronounced neurotropics, but I find that weird to say, and I've always said nootropics, so I'm sticking with it. You can also refer to nootropics as smart drugs, which basically explains what it is they do. They're supplements or drugs that are designed to make you smarter, or that have the side effect of making you smarter. Of course, if you've watched this channel before, you'll know that the term smarter is really rather arbitrary. It doesn't really describe much in particular. So normally you're focusing on boosting something like concentration, creativity, memory, social confidence, and different supplements, different drugs, each do these things to different extents. Some of them are safe, some of them are dangerous, some of them we just don't know. And that's the most important thing to know if you're going to be experimenting with this kind of thing. So the first nootropic that you've probably already heard of, that you're most familiar with, is caffeine. Believe it or not, caffeine does fit the description of a nootropic. This is something that we all take on a regular basis in order to be more alert, more awake, in order to stave off sleep, to boost our memories, our focus, our attention, and that basically is what a nootropic is. Some people would argue that caffeine is not technically a nootropic because it doesn't only have positive effects, it also has some negative effects, but I would argue that that's true of pretty much all nootropics. So seeing as we are familiar with caffeine, let's look at how it works, and that'll help us to understand how some of the other nootropics you might take work. And to do that, we're first going to have to quickly look at the brain. And just to give a quick overview, the brain is made up of lots of neurons. Neurons are brain cells. They're connected by tendrils called axons and dendrites. And essentially you have this big web of neurons, each of which represents a different experience. And you can encode your memories in here. And we all have a different one which forms over the duration of our lives through brain plasticity. And it can be called your connectome. Neurons fire, and that's how we experience things. So if a neuron fires that represents a part of your body, you might feel as though you've been pinched in that part of your body. If another neuron fires that stores a memory, then you might see that memory flash up in your mind's eye. So that's how neurons work. When neurons fire, we call this an action potential, and this excites the nearby neuron. So when one neuron fires, others near it become more likely to fire. But they need a lot of different input in order to cross an activation threshold, at which point they fire and the chain continues. And this is why remembering one thing might make you think of something else, or why performing the beginning of the alphabet makes it easier to follow through and know the rest of the alphabet. Neurotransmitters are chemicals produced in the brain, and these modulate the way that your neurons act. It can make them more or less likely to fire. That means that they're excitatory or inhibitory. Likewise, they can make you feel happy or sad. They can make your neurons more likely to form new connections. When two neurons fire together at the same time over and over, they become connected, and thus one firing will almost always lead to the other firing. This is the basis of brain plasticity. So when you drink caffeine, what's really happening is that you're blocking your adenosine receptors. Caffeine as a molecule is very similar to adenosine, and thus it lodges into the receptors in the neurons that are there to receive adenosine. Adenosine is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. That means that it makes the neurons less likely to fire. It's also a byproduct of the energy process in cells, including brain cells. So over time, throughout the day, adenosine builds up in your brain, clogs up your system, suppresses activity across your connectome, and you become drowsy and tired and start to struggle to focus. So when you drink caffeine, you're blocking those receptors, making the adenosine less effective, and thereby waking yourself back up. And as you wake up, the brain also produces other stimulatory neurotransmitters such as dopamine, adrenaline, etc. So this is how caffeine makes us more focused and alert, but it can also have some negative consequences. It can make us jittery, it can make us nervous. Essentially, it's producing many of the same neurotransmitters and hormones that we associate with stress. So it's a bit like stress in a cup. You can think of your body and your brain as always being in one of two states, fight or flight, or rest and digest. If you're not restful, then you're alert and you're focused and you're wired. So this brings with it good things like focus and attention and memory, and bad things like jitters and difficulty sleeping. This is why one of the most popular and basic nootropic stacks is to add L-theanine to caffeine. L-theanine is a xanthine like caffeine, and it also comes from plants and can be found in green tea naturally. L-theanine stimulates the production of GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid, and it also reduces the activity of glutamate. GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So when you increase GABA and decrease glutamate, you bring down the activity of the brain. And this is why many people find that when you combine the two, you have a kind of calm focus. You increase your dopamine and your attention and remove the tiredness that comes from the adenosine, but you reduce activity in the brain in other ways so that you don't get too jittery and on edge. So many people find this to be a very pleasing combination. You can get this combination naturally from yerba mate tea, and Darwin called that the world's most perfect stimulant. So if you're interested in trying out nootropics and you want to boost your mental performance just a little, then that's one interesting way of doing it. That's a very basic beginner's stack you can try out. It's completely natural and the side effects are minimal. If you want to up things slightly, then you might try something like piracetam or another racetam. Piracetam increases the brain's ability to use acetylcholine. This is another excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's one that has been shown to play important roles in things like memory, and also many people say it boosts their creativity, their appreciation of music, even their verbal fluency and their focus during conversations. So it's said to have lots of positive benefits, and lots of people find it's a great way to feel more alert, but it works over time. You don't just take it once like caffeine, you need to take it repeatedly throughout the days, and then gradually your brain will become better at using that acetylcholine. If you're going to use piracetam, it's always recommended that you also take a source of choline, because choline is a precursor to acetylcholine. It's what the brain uses to create acetylcholine. If you don't take choline on top of the piracetam, you may get headaches because you run out of acetylcholine. Many people find piracetam to be useful. Personally, I didn't find much of an effect, and I have been somewhat put off by reports of people getting brain fog as a result of using piracetam. If you want to go up another echelon, then you might try modafinil. Modafinil is a nootropic that is most often likened to a real-life NZT or Limitless pill. This is apparently used by a lot of one-percenters, by a lot of Silicon Valley CEOs, in order for them to get an edge on their competition. It's also used by some students, but it's technically illegal in a lot of places unless you have a prescription. It's actually a medication for narcolepsy, that being the condition where you fall asleep without warning. So it's another one that makes you more awake and more focused, similar to caffeine, but to a higher degree. It's apparently been used by the military in studies and experiments looking at ways to increase the focus of their fighter pilots, so it is another level on top of caffeine. The mechanisms of action aren't fully understood, but we know that it has some influence on orexin, which is a neurotransmitter that regulates our sleep-wake cycle, and this makes a lot of sense when you think that it makes you less tired and more awake. Some people use modafinil who are on night shift work, but a lot of people, like Dave Asprey for instance, recommend that you use it in order to work late into the night, to finish projects and to wake up feeling fresh the next day. My warning here is that there always is a kind of price to pay when it comes to skipping sleep. Eventually you need to pay that debt, or you'll just become more and more wired and tired, which isn't a good state to be in. But is modafinil like a real limitless pill? Well, in some ways yes, and in some ways no. From my experience, it'll make you more focused. Yes, it'll help you to complete projects, and it can help to stave off tiredness so you can work longer hours, wake up earlier and be productive, which are things I do need to do. But on the other hand, it isn't positive across the board, because it can be negative for your creativity. Creativity occurs when we're more relaxed and less focused. If you've seen my video on functional fixedness, then you'll know this. When we relax, we can explore our connectome and we can fire lots of different neurons at the same time. That's how you create novel connections and new patterns. When you're very focused, when you've got a lot of cortisol and adrenaline and dopamine running through your system, then you're focused on just one area, on just one thing. And that makes you less creative, even though you're more focused. And this is my problem really with nootropics, any nootropics that focus purely on boosting one neurotransmitter. I always say you can't pick and choose neurotransmitters. For one, acting on one will always have effects on the others. I find that modafinil removes my appetite, which might sound a good thing, but it also makes me need the loo a lot. And a lot of other people who use it say the same thing. Because if you change your orexins, if you change your sleep-wake cycle, you're also changing your eating cycle and your digestion cycle, and you're altering your stress levels, because all these things tie in. Likewise, anything that increases dopamine will also increase cortisol, stress, Likewise, anything that increases GABA is also going to increase melatonin and make you feel sleepy. You can't affect just one neurotransmitter without affecting the others, and you're essentially putting your brain into one mental state instead of being able to adapt and switch between them at will. So whilst it might be useful when you need that laser focus for a short amount of time, modafinil lasts about 10 hours by the way, it's not overall going to improve your performance. It'll actually make you less social because it'll make you more anxious, whereas people might use L-theanine or something like 5-HTP in order to be more social and more confident, because that helps them relax and to be less aware of their own neuroticism. So for you guys, I'm dipping into the Nootropics archive and trying some out again just to refresh my memory on what they're like. Right now, I'm using some modafinil and I'm doing some coding, or rather, I'm trying to learn a new coding concept. And actually, I'm finding myself a little bit too wired to take in the information. I just want to keep writing. This is perfect for my copywriting. If I was just writing something boring, then it really helps me to stay attached to the screen. But for absorbing information, it's not proving to be all that helpful. On the other hand, when I used the new product from Bulletproof, which is Neuromaster or something like that, that includes coffee bean extract, which increases BDNF and brain plasticity. And while I can't say for sure whether it worked or not, you know, there's always the element of placebo. I actually found I absorbed a lot of coding information a lot more efficiently and effectively than maybe I normally would. Like I say, it's hard to be sure, but I would certainly say that when it comes to nootropics, there's horses for courses, and that's one of the problems with using nootropics, because when in life do you just have to do one thing? You don't. This modafinil is going to last now 10 hours, so good luck to me focusing on this lesson and taking it all in. I just poured cold water onto my coffee. Pretty sure Eddie Mora never did that. So yeah, there's lots more nootropics that work like this on specific neurotransmitters, but I feel that that's not really the way that you boost overall mental performance. I'm also very aware of tolerance, of dependence, and of adaptation. When you use any nootropic for too long, or any neurotransmitter is stimulated for too long, your brain adapts. So when you drink a lot of caffeine and you block those adenosine receptors, the brain responds by creating more adenosine receptors, so that when you're not on caffeine, you now feel more tired because you're more sensitive to adenosine. And whilst there are no known side effects for modafinil or paracetam, there's nothing to say that couldn't happen as well, or that there couldn't be other long-term effects that we don't know about, because there haven't been a lot of studies looking at the long-term implications of using nootropics. I'm not saying don't use them, I'm saying being very careful, and that I don't actually recommend this kind of nootropic. Like I said, it could be useful as a laser focus tool for rare occasions, so you don't adapt to them. And only when you're very careful with where you source it, how you use it, start with very small doses, etc. I do think we shouldn't overreact to this either, because if you drink alcohol, then actually you're affecting your brain in a negative way knowingly, and that's fine. We do many things that affect our brains negatively knowingly, so at least with nootropics you're trying to do something positive. I'm just saying be very careful, and they're not a panacea. They won't turn you into Bradley Cooper from Limitless. So what will turn you into Bradley Coopers from Limitless? Well, there are a couple of different alternative strategies when it comes to nootropics. The first I'd like to touch on briefly are nootropics that boost brain plasticity. So I've talked in the past about brain plasticity. This is any kind of nootropic that increases your brain's ability to grow and learn. So that means things like lion's mane, it means things like magnesium threonate, things that boost BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, because they encourage the formation of new connections between your brain, and that can help you to learn. Now, there is such thing as negative plasticity, meaning that you learn the wrong things, you pick up bad habits, or you learn incorrect information. But on the whole, increasing plasticity is a great way to boost intelligence. And actually, in my video on intelligence, I concluded that ultimately, smarts equates to adaptation plus opportunity. So I'm not saying that these are a panacea either, but I'm saying that I'm certainly interested in using things like magnesium threonate, or like lion's mane, or Siltep, or even coffee fruit extract in order to boost your brain plasticity potentially. That's an interesting avenue that deserves more attention. But the best way to boost your brain power is to focus on things that increase your energy for your brain and the nutrition available for your brain. So you don't need necessarily to consume Paracetam to boost your acetylcholine. Just eating more choline will have a similar effect. You can also stack on top of that an acetylcholine esterase inhibitor, which means you're inhibiting the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. It can get quite complicated. These stacks get very elaborate and creative. The best way to boost your mental performance with supplementation is to consume nutrients, things that we know the brain needs to thrive and operate at its best. So that means things like omega-3 fatty acid. We know this is fantastic for the brain. It increases cell membrane permeability so that signals can be sent more easily to and from the brain. Also quite interesting are nootropics that increase the energy supply to the brain, which can be categorized as metabolic cognitive enhancers. So here you have things like MCT oil, which is coconut oil, a kind of oil which provides ketones which the brain can use as an alternative form of energy to glucose. Then you have things like vinpocetine, which increase blood flow to specific regions of the brain. And then you have anything that increases mitochondrial function. Lutein can do this, so can L-carnitine, often the kind of things that bodybuilders or athletes will use in order to run faster. Creatine is one of the best and has been shown in studies to increase scores on IQ tests. It works by letting the body recycle ATP by converting ADP and AMP back into ATP. So in other words, giving the brain a slightly more usable energy so you can focus just that little bit longer. These are beneficial, they're very healthy and nutritious. Generally, they don't involve any synthetic materials and can be sourced naturally from your foods, etc. Vitamin C, B complex vitamins, all of these are used to make neurotransmitters so the brain has access to more of them when it needs them. Another of my absolute favorites at the moment is cordyceps, and cordyceps is a kind of mushroom that has been shown to reduce adrenal fatigue and seems to be very useful in combating kind of tiredness and that kind of stress that comes when you're burned out, 21st century syndrome. And that's kind of what I need because I work long hours, I train long hours, and this has been helping me to go for longer before I reach burnout. Cordyceps might also help you to make more use of ATP, which means it would stack very well with creatine, and that's something I've been using in combination. I also like vitamin D as well, and I'm interested in the use of cocoa powder. I've talked about that on this channel before. So there's tons of nutrients out there and lots of superfoods that have all kinds of benefits that we're only just discovering or researching. And if you do some reading, you can find lots of natural nutrients that boost brain power in the smallest of ways. And if you just increase your overall diet to include more of this stuff, then you'll see not huge transformative alterations to your brain state, but just you feeling better. I'll go into nutrition for the brain in much more detail in a future video, but suffice to say, I think this is the most effective way to boost your brain power without any negative side effects. You also get a bunch of ready-made stacks, and these are basically combinations of lower level nootropics that are known to have some cognitive benefits, all stuffed together into one package, and that might include things like ginkgo biloba, which is another supplement that increases blood flow to the brain. It might include something like bacopa or vinpocetine and L-theanine and choline. These things work fairly effectively in some cases because they're well designed, or they don't work so well because they're badly designed. You want to be aware of proprietary blends. That means that they don't tell you the exact ingredients or the exact amounts. That normally means you're not getting very much. And you want to be aware of companies that stuff a whole bunch of stuff in without really thinking about it and could cause an overdose. Generally, it's better and cheaper to source the ingredients yourself and create your own stacks and to see what works for you. And then that way you can test what's working over time, find some kind of way to measure your performance. I look at my words per minute, my output when I'm writing, because that's what I'm trying to increase, and then increase or decrease specific ingredients depending on what you have the most luck with. Of course, on top of this, exercise is the most important because it increases brain plasticity, increases blood flow to the brain, it increases your mood. Sleep is super important, and stimulating your brain by learning new things. Nootropics is not going to replace other forms of lifestyle choices that have a much bigger impact on your brain function. And if you want to get vitamin D, then the best way to do so is to get outside. Spend more time outside. You'll feel so much more energetic, you'll sleep so much better. People who have lots of energy, they tend to spend a lot of time outside. Don't aim to feel like some kind of superhuman version of yourself, focused, wired, switched on, charming, because it doesn't work like that. There isn't anything out there that will completely transform your brain for the better. Instead, just give your brain the nutrients that you know it needs to perform its best. It's that simple. And of course, if you want to experiment with the nootropics, which I do from time to time, then keep it to moderate doses and use them just when you need them to get specific results in the short term. So hope you found this video useful and interesting, guys. If you did, then please leave a like, please share it around, comment down below and let me know what you think. Do you use nootropics? Do you disagree or agree with anything I've said here? In future, if you want to see more like this, I'll look at some specific nutrients and supplements that I highly recommend for boosting brain power, lutein being one of my favourite, and I've got lots more to cover too. So if that sounds good, then stay tuned, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a ton for watching. Bye for now.